Okay, so just like last time, in order to help you with following the different threads of this story, remember I said to you the best way to do it is to try to keep thinking of this as three stories that are following three different threads, right? So we have the manliest story during the fall of the decline of the Roman Empire, right? We have the story of Olivier, who's in the Middle Ages, and as we'll see later on, the Black Death, you know, we know that that's going to come up on the horizon. And we also have Julian's story, which is told during the first half of the 20th century, right? And we know that he, from the first line of the novel, we know that he dies during World War II, right? So we know a lot of what is going to happen to these characters. We know, you know, that they're going to die in various ways. We know that there's going to, you know, be all sorts of happy and unhappy things that happen to them. But of course, the question that's really being asked for us to look back is why? Like, what is the explanation? What is the real events that happened that led to their decisions and their paths through life, right? So, like, why is Manlius, for example, why is he seen as this like saintly bishop, right, who converted the Jews and saved the local area and so on? Like, why is he seen in this way by history? And yet, at the same time, Julian sees that he has a whole other side to him, like Manlius, the secular scholar who admires the Romans and, right, has this whole other side to him that seems at odds with his Christian side, right? Similarly, and we haven't seen as much of Olivier's story yet. His story is still yet to unfold, and the major characters in his life, apart from Cicciani and Pisano, still haven't appeared yet, right? There are still some more very important characters in his life to come along, but we've seen already that, you know, his story, as it has been handed down by history, has become very, very distorted, right? And a lot of the details are wrong. A lot of poetry has been lost. And so a lot of the things about Olivier that the historians know about, of course he's not a real character, he's not a real person, he's just a character, but a lot of the things that the historians in the book have come across are also wrong. And so we get to see some of those things corrected to learn about the real story of Olivier, right? And then of course we're starting to see the bigger picture of Julian. As we'll talk today, we start to see not only his friendship with Julia and Claude Bronson, right, but we're also introduced to a couple more of his friends in today's reading, right, Marcel and Bernard, right? So follow those three threads, right? Follow the relationships between those three main characters, and you shouldn't have too much trouble following the novel. Nonetheless, as I said, I'll do a quick overview, quick synopsis, and then we'll talk about some of the ideas about friendship that are included in today's reading. Okay, so the beginning of our reading for today, we find out about the history of Julia and why she became a painter, right? And we learn that she began to have this passion when she was 10 years old, and she was sort of rebelling against her family, against her nanny, against various things, and she discovers this as a way out. Now, in explaining this, we go back into the background of Julia's parents, and we see that her father, Claude, was originally, he was followed his family footsteps, right? Followed in the family business, followed in, you know, all the things that were expected of him as a Jewish man, all sorts of other things. And he ends up marrying this woman, Rachel, but she has obviously some kind of mental illness, right? She obviously has some kind of emotional problems, and this ends with them getting divorced, right? And this is a big disgrace upon his family, but Claude accepts all the blame for it. Right? Now, Claude finds that many people both from his family and amongst his friends judge him very harshly, even though it's not his fault, right? That, like, his marriage ended, even though it's not his fault that, you know, his wife has these problems, he decides that he is going to cut himself off from anyone who judges him or blames him for the collapse of his marriage, right? So he cuts himself off from his family quite a bit, from his friends, and even from his religion, and even from being German, right? He now starts to see himself as being more French than German, right? So he reinvents himself as a new person through these renunciations. So then, to come back to Julia, we see that she's therefore, because of this split between her parents, that she's raised in a very unusual way, right? That she's taken on trips around Europe by her father instead of being in school, right? She's going around all different places around the world, and particularly around Europe. She's sometimes raised by nannies, sometimes raised just by her father, but she develops this very close relationship with her father because of this. And her father, in turn, instead of raising her like he was raised, instead he gives her this very kind of liberal education, and he doesn't make her induct her into any of her cultural background. So he doesn't give her anything that's German. He doesn't induct her into any of the Jewish rituals, right, or anything like that. And so she has a very secular upbringing. Okay. So when we return to that opening about Julia at the age of 10 discovering painting, we see that part of this event in which she discovers painting was that she had seen a picture in a gallery and she wanted to go and look at it some more, and her nanny had said, no, that painting is rubbish, it's stupid. And so she sneaks out of the house and she goes to the gallery herself. And there, she just happens to meet a rather famous artist, right? Pablo Picasso, who's one of the top, most famous artists of the 20th century, right? And Picasso was Spanish, but he lived a lot of his life in Paris, right? And Picasso was, even though he was a very talented painter, he was a pretty mean human being. He's pretty cruel to his wife, to his mistresses, to his girlfriends. You get the picture, right? Nonetheless, he has a very sort of a humorous conversation with Julia, and she ends up buying one of his paintings for all the money that she has, which is only a tiny amount, right? And if any of you know how much a Picasso is worth today, it's worth millions and millions of dollars, right? And she buys it for 4 francs, which is nothing. Okay, so. Okay. Now, we see the next section jumps back and forth between two of the timelines. First of all, we see Julian, through a friend, learns about an article that shows him some interesting research that Cicciani, remember Cardinal Cicciani, the employer of Olivier, had arranged for a loan to the Comte de Frejus, right? And remembering from the story, the doubtful story that we're given at the beginning of the book, right? Supposedly Olivier had been in love with Isabelle de Frejus, the Comte de Frejus' wife, right? That's the story that's been handed down, okay? So Julian looks at this new bit of evidence that he has, and he's like, that's strange, right? Because he knows that later on, Cicciani turns against Olivier. So he's like, he supports Frejus, he supports Olivier. Why would he turn against Olivier, right? Olivier is one of his own, okay? And we see in the next part, where we actually jump to Cicciani talking to Frejus about this loan, right? And we see that the Comte de Frejus had been, Comte means, in French means the Count, right? Like an aristocratic title. and the Comte de Frejus had been involved in some fighting for the king, and he had been captured, and a condition of his release was that he come up with a bunch of money so that the rest of his relations who were still in prison, who still were captured, would then be released, right? It's a common way of raising money to ransom people, right? This is arranged, right? And what Ciociani wants is that he says, I'll give you the money, right? I'll let you have the money, but in return, you owe me a favor, right? I want access to this guy. You owe me a political favor, right? So we see him make this deal, okay? Okay, now we then jump to Manlius's time, and we see Manlius being made the new bishop, right? It's a big ceremony, right? The powerful churchmen are there. Manlius, makes a big show of saying, no, I'm not worthy. Oh, I shouldn't be bishop. Oh, I'm just a poor sinner. Right? And it's all a big show, but eventually he, of course, accepts and becomes a powerful bishop, claiming that he's gone through like a miraculous conversion to Christianity, when we've seen behind the scenes that he doesn't believe in it at all. Right, we then have the section jumping back to Julian, and Julian, we see he goes to dinner with Julia and also his two childhood friends, right? Two friends that he's known since he was a boy, Bernard and Marcel, right? And Marcel and Bernard, they kind of look alike. They're similar in appearance, but their characters are quite different. Characters are quite different. Nonetheless, this physical resemblance is also meant to also symbolize in part that they, even though they have opposite characters in some ways, there are certain things about them that are also very similar. And part of that similarity is that they are quite ruthless in getting what they want, right? So getting what, if someone stands in their way, if there's something that they want, right, even though they have different goals, they both are willing to step on other people to get it. All right. We also learn in passing that the Great Depression now, remembering this is now the 1930s, has hit, and so it's having quite a devastating effect on the economy. And so Claude Bronson, whom we saw as a rich businessman, is struggling with his factories. Okay. Now we jump back to Manlius's time, remembering, just you follow the three threads, you can follow the story easily. Right, we jump back to Manlius's time, and we see that Manlius becoming the bishop has caused some problems, right? Insofar as the two powerful families in that area, Manlius's family and Felix's family, right? They had balanced their power by making sure that, like, Manlius's family always took the political appointments, whereas Felix's family, they always took the church appointments, and that's how they split them up between them and ensured that they got along with each other. So, as you can imagine, suddenly Manlius is now treading on the territory, the traditional roles that are played by Felix's family and have been for, as it says there, for 4 generations, so for quite a while, more than 100 years. And so Felix's family is very upset, and they want him to take action. Felix, though, remember, we've seen, is good friends with Manlius, right? And remember, the two of them have been friends for more than 20 years, right? They grew up together, they've been strong friends, they have similar interests, right? And Felix says, don't worry, I'm sure Manlius is just doing this just for the common good, right? He's not out to grab power from us, he's not trying to hurt our family, right? It's what he tells, that's what Felix tells his family, and then he goes to visit Manlius, and he asks him, are you trying to make a grab for power? And Manlius says, no. I'm simply trying to protect us all, I'm trying to protect us all. There's this barbarian threat. Rome isn't doing anything. I've got to step up and help us because no one else will. Remember, Julian had been in Rome, right, to this point. He spent 3 years there. He now moves back to France for his first academic appointment. We assume at the University of Montpellier. And at first he moves into his old family house, but he doesn't feel very comfortable there. So he sells the house and he buys an apartment and he decorates it with a couple of paintings he has by artists that are now very famous, Greuze and Cézanne, right? Which would also be worth, especially the Cézanne would be worth millions of dollars now, but he's able to buy them cheaply at that time. And he also has 4 paintings by Julia in his apartment. Right, we see that Julia, in turn, has, with her relationship or her friendship with Julian, one of the things that she likes about him is that he will tell her very honestly what he thinks about her and about her painting. And he's very critical of what she's painting, right? And so those 4 paintings that he has in his house are the result of just him selecting, every now and then he likes one of her paintings. For the rest, he's like, no, don't like it. No, not good enough. No, you still got to work on it. And he tells her, like, she's still too obviously influenced by other artists. Right? He says, like, I can see in your work, oh yeah, you've borrowed from this artist or from that artist or from that style. You haven't found your own voice yet. So Julia, she likes this about Julian, right? To this point, she's been, as we've seen, everyone has been supportive of her, especially her father, right? And that's a good thing in some ways. But at the same time, emotionally, she finds that a bit smothering, right? And remember, the man that she was briefly married to as well, right? He was also very supportive, very loving, right? Very caring, but that wasn't what she needed, right? And instead, she finds it's refreshing to have someone like Julian, whom she doesn't have to worry about, like, you know, like him smothering her. He will just tell her bluntly, honestly, what he thinks. So nonetheless, Julian, remember, he was having all those affairs with different women when he was in Rome, and he's worried that he'll do the same thing to Julia, right? He's worried that he'll mess it up and that he missed his opportunity when they were in Jerusalem traveling through there. And so they don't get together at this time, and instead they start writing to each other and form a deeper bond. Now, war starts to approach, seems more and more likely, and we see that in the debate about the war and the different political sides, Bernard and Marcel take their sides, whereas at the end of our reading, we see that Julian, instead, he withdraws from politics, withdraws from public life, right? What is the who is the opposite in this way in our story? Julian withdraws from public life. Manlius, right? We've seen, remember, Sophia has the conversation with Manlius saying, you should not stay in your study and write poems and philosophy and so on. You should get out there, you should become a bishop, you should enter public life. We see Julian does at this stage anyway, does the opposite, right? He decides he's going to focus on his studies, he's not going to worry about the impending war, and he's going to write his great big book on Neoplatonism. Okay. Right, so that's where we are at in our story for today. In terms of ideas, I want to look in particular at one big one today, and that has to do with using this very famous philosopher, Aristotle, right? And using his ideas, we touched on it briefly in an earlier class, but I want to go into more depth because I think it's a really, really useful tool for thinking about the relationships between the different characters in this novel, okay? So we're going to look at Aristotle, and he comes up with 3 different ways of thinking about friendship, or 3 different levels, if you like, of friendship. So this comes from a book by Aristotle called the Nicomachean Ethics, or to make it easier to remember, just call it the Ethics, right? So this is his book on ethics. What is ethics again? We talked about it in the midterm. What is it?
Socially followed rules. Like rules that are followed like socially.
It's close to that. It's similar to morals, but morals are a little bit different because morals are the rules that you already have, right? But how do you get to those rules, right? That's what ethics is about, right? How do you come up with your morals? How do you come up with your idea of what is right and wrong, right? So what are the principles, what are the logic by which you come up with your ideas about what is good, what is bad, right? So that's the difference between how we can think about ethics and morals, right? Morals are the rules, right? And in a way, you kind of don't have to necessarily justify them, right? So if you have the 10 Commandments, for example, right? God doesn't sit down and say, oh, you should do this because. He just says, I'm God, do this, right? So morals don't have to be justified by ethics, but ethics is the branch of philosophy that gets us to think about, well, why should we do this? Why should we act in a particular way? Oh, because it's good, or it's bad, or it's good, or it's evil, depending upon what your desired outcome is. Right? So in the Nicomachean Ethics, or the Ethics, Aristotle's main sort of question that he wants to look at, and it's a very typical kind of Greek philosopher's question, is how do we, well, first of all, he asks the question, what do all human beings want? What do all human beings want? Can you imagine? Could there be an easy answer to that? Happiness. Yes. That's Aristotle's conclusion. We all want to be happy, right? Now, I've met a few human beings who might not fit into that category. I've met some pretty miserable people. But I think generally he's pretty right, right? Human beings, as a rule, if you ask, what do you want? I'd like to be happy, okay? So Aristotle then spends the whole of the ethics, well, not the whole, the first part is coming up with this question, what do humans want? We want happiness. And then the rest of the book is dedicated to thinking, well, how do I get happiness? What's going to make me happy, right? And so he examines all sorts of different avenues that we might take, different strategies, different pathways through life that might make us happy, right? So is being very rich going to make me happy? Is being very famous? Is being very powerful, right? All these different possibilities that he examines, will they make you happy? Right? Now, Aristotle's conclusion may seem a little lame by today's standards, but nonetheless he concludes that ultimately the thing that makes us happy is, and because it's the one thing that really lasts, as opposed to power, fame, money, and all those sorts of things, is that of virtue, right? Being good. Right, is something that he thinks is going to make us happy. I'm not so sure, but nonetheless, that's his approach. Now, as part of this strategy of happiness, right, he says one of the things that also helps us on this path to happiness is to have friends. Right? Now, it seems fairly obvious. It's not usual that someone who is happy is someone who just has no friends and no one likes them, right? Usually if you're a happy person, you're going to have friends and you're going to have lots of them, and people are going to be attracted to your happiness. So Aristotle looks at this question, well, what is a friend? What kind of friend do we need if we're going to be happy? All right? So as I said, he divides this into 3 different levels. And these 3 levels are very useful, as I said, as we go on looking at the different characters, to divide up the relationships that we see between these three different kinds of friendships. Okay. Now, I should also make it clear to you that even though Aristotle says one of these kinds of friendships is the best, it doesn't mean that he thinks that you shouldn't have the other two, right? All three of these friendships are important for any society, for any person, right? We need all three kinds of friends. But he is saying that the third kind, last kind, is the most important for happiness, right? For that ultimate goal. Okay? All right. So the first kind of friendship that Aristotle talks about is that kind of friendship which is grounded in utility or usefulness, right? And as I said, this in itself is not seen by Aristotle as being a bad thing, right? We need friends who can help us, right? We need sometimes people in powerful places or who can pull strings for us or who can help us in a particular situation. We need those kinds of friends in society. But there are both advantages and disadvantages to this kind of friendship. And that's why when Aristotle is considering it from that perspective of what is going to make me happy, right, he says this kind of friendship is useful, it's important, but ultimately it's not going to make me happy. Why? Because, well, what would be the problem with a friendship based just upon the fact that someone else can help you? Someone else is useful. What would be the problem with that, potentially? Right, the friendship would disappear as soon as you had no use for that person anymore, wouldn't it? Right? So that is not, therefore, a very lasting or enduring or friendship that is going to really be important in the long term. So this is what Aristotle has to say. He says, now, the useful is not permanent, but is always changing, right? So the person who is useful to you when you are, a child might be a different person when you're a teenager, might be a different person when you're growing up, when you have a career, right? There are different stages where different people are going to be useful to you, right? But it's never going to be, or it's rarely going to be exactly the same. Thus, when the motive of friendship is done away, the friendship is dissolved inasmuch as it existed only for the ends in question, right? So as soon as the use value disappears, so does the friendship, right? So like I said, this kind of friendship is important in society. Aristotle is not saying you shouldn't have that kind of friend, but he's just saying if you're looking for that lasting goal of friendship, of happiness, then this kind of friendship is not going to get you there, right? Okay. So, second kind of friendship that is based upon pleasure, right? And we all have friends like this. There are friends that are fun to go out with, they're fun to go partying with, they're fun to do activities with, right? They're fun people to be around. It's fun, like you like being around them. What is the problem with that kind of friendship? Right? Why?
Because you get used to the people.
Yeah. So is that friendship going to last? Right? So it's a similar logic to what we saw with the first one, right? The first one we saw, you're friends with someone because they're useful to you. The usefulness goes away, you're not friends anymore, right? The second one, someone is fun to be around, they're a pleasure to be around, it's fun to do stuff with them, right? But as soon as they're not fun anymore, you're like, oh, I don't want to go out with that person, I don't want to go out with her or him, right? Oh, they're so boring these days, they're not fun anymore, I don't want to be friends with them, right? So the pleasure and use value have this in common, that once they go away, if the friendship is grounded, right, is founded upon that and nothing else, then as soon as the pleasure goes away, then so too does the friendship. So here's what Aristotle says. On the other hand, the friendship of young people seems to aim at pleasure, for they live under the guidance of emotion and pursue above all what is pleasant to themselves and what is immediately before them. But with increasing age, their pleasures become different. This is why they quickly become friends and quickly cease to be so. Right? So I think you'll find this as the older you get, right? Like when you're young, you make lots of friends, have lots of acquaintances, but you also go through a lot of friends when you're young. And then as you get older, your real friends, your longer term friends start to stick around, hopefully. Their friendship changes with the object that is found pleasant, and such pleasure alters quickly. Young people are amorous too, for the greater part of the friendship of love depends on emotion and aims at pleasure. This is why they fall in love and quickly fall out of love, changing often within a single day. But these people do wish to spend their days and lives together, for it is thus they attain the purpose of their friendship. Right? So these first two models, right, if it's a friendship only based in use value or a friendship only based in pleasure, right? As soon as those foundations disappear, as soon as the pleasure or the use value goes away, so does the friendship. Okay? So, what then does Aristotle recommend as his lasting model of friendship? He says the lasting model of friendship is one that is grounded in virtue. What does he mean by this? Well, does that mean like this third kind of friendship can't be useful to you? Well, no, right? A real friend, right, can be useful to you. Does it mean they can't be fun to be around? Well, of course, yes, they can be fun to be around. But remember, those first two kinds of friendships, use value or pleasure, are the basis of the friendship, right? They're what is the friendship rests upon. And without it, there is no friendship, right? Whereas you can have fun with this kind of friend. They can be useful to you. But if those things go away, the friendship is still there, right? And that's because this idea of virtue that Aristotle has, what he means by this is that you like the other person for their character, right? You like them because you think they're a good person. You like them for who they are as a person, right? So like I said, that doesn't exclude them being a pleasure to be around, fun to be around. It doesn't exclude them from being useful to you, right? They might have those properties as well, right? They might have those things as well. But if they stop being useful to you or they stop being a pleasure to be around, you don't stop being friends with them, because the basis of your friendship, the reason that you're friends with them, is not because of pleasure and use value. It's because you like them as a person. Right? Okay. So, because our character, as a rule, doesn't really change all that much according to circumstances. I mean, I guess like some people do change drastically, but most human beings don't, do they? Most people, they are one person and you meet them and they might mature and they might change and they might have experiences. But as a rule, their basic character remains the same, right? And so this is what Aristotle is talking about, is that like if you love, if you care about, if you have become friends with the character, the person of someone else, then you have become friends in a way that is much more stable and permanent. So, here's what he says about this third one. Perfect friendship, and notice this language, like to us, sounds sexist, and that's because it is, right? Aristotle does not think about friendship between women or between two women or between a man and a woman. He thinks about it as being between two men, right? So perfect friendship is the friendship of men who are good and alike in virtue. For these wish well alike to each other qua good, right, with regard to the good. And they are good in themselves. Right? So they like each other because they see each other as being good people, is what he's saying. Right? So each of them looks at the other and says, yeah, I like you. Yeah, you're a good person. Yeah, I like you for who you are. Now those who wish well to their friends for their sake are most truly friends, for they do this by reason of their own nature and not incidentally. In other words, not because of other external things. Therefore, their friendship lasts as long as they are good, right? And goodness is an enduring quality. In other words, you like the other person, you think that they're good, their character is good, they're a nice person, you like them for who they are, not because of external things, even though you might like those as well, right? But you think, well, you know, this person is a good person, I like them for that, and they're probably going to stay a good person for the rest of their lives. Therefore, you have a firm foundation for being friends with them. Okay. So like I said, these three categories, these three different modes of friendship are very useful for us when we think about the characters and their relations in the Dream of Scipio. And that's why I've mentioned it here today. Right? There's no doubt that Ian Pears himself, like he's definitely read Aristotle, he's certainly familiar with this idea of the three different kinds of friendship. And we can use it to describe or to categorize the different kinds of friendship that the characters have in the course of the novel. Right? So let's begin with an example. Let's begin with the example of Julian, right? And his friend Bernard. What kind out of the three kinds of friendship that Aristotle describes, use value, pleasure, and virtue, real friendship, what kind of friend is Bernard? Right. Look at the quote here. Between Julian and Bernard, there was an amity, which means friendship, of relaxation. Right? He's a fun guy to be around. Okay? Bernard was amusing in a way that Marcel could not imitate and did not wish to imitate. Right? So when we see Bernard, for example, at the birthday party, right? He's talking a lot, he's making jokes, you know, he's flirting with Julia, he's asking her questions, so he's being very charming, right? He's fun to be around. He's the life of the party, right? And so this is his attachment to Julia, is that they have this friendship that is, as we see, grounded in pleasure, right? The second of the kinds of friendship. Marcel? Right? Utility or use value. And we see there, Marcel, between Julian and Marcel is a friendship of interest. Right? In other words, they have interests that overlap, they can help each other, right? And so they are useful to each other. Right? And that's the ground, the foundation of their friendship. Right? What about Julia? Is she use value, pleasure, or virtue? Virtue? Yes? Anyone else think so? Yes? Right. So we see the relationship between Julia and Julian. Do they have fun together? Yeah. Are they useful to each other? Yeah. But that's not the foundation of their relationship, is it? Right? And we see in this next quote. The conversation summed up much of his appeal for her. Alone of anybody she had ever met, he allowed her room to breathe. He wanted nothing from her, right? So he's not using her. Merely knowing that she lived was sufficient for him. He did not wish to live with her, marry her, did not become jealous or fretful for her. He did not watch her or live through her. did not swamp her with attentions or drown her with excess adoration. Above all, he did not make things easy for her. Right? So these are all the things that like her dad has done for her, and then her initial husband. All negatives, all things she was unused to. Right? So this is unusual for her, right? She's like, normally in a man she'd be thinking, oh, he's kind of distant, and he says things that aren't complimentary about my painting sometimes, and so on. And so she's like, I like that. I like that he has his own mind, and I like that he's honest with me. I like that he doesn't smother me. He admired what she did, but was brutally honest when asked his opinion. Where he found the resource for this, neither she nor he knew. It was a far cry from the self-confident pretense he learned with many of the women he pursued over the years, or the detachment he formed for the world in general. Both Bernard and Marcel, neither of them particularly acute in such matters, right? They're not very smart about love, realized that Julian and Julia were deeply in love with each other, right? So clearly, we have these three modes of friendship visible for us in the three friendships that we see surrounding Julian at his birthday party, right? The use value, the overlap of interests, where Marcel is useful to Julian and Julian is useful to Marcel, right? Use value, mode number one. Bernard, he's the life of the party. He's fun to be around. He has, funny things to say, and, he's able to, bring people out and have fun with them. Second mode of pleasure. Then, thirdly, the mode of virtue, of real friendship that we see between Julian and Julia. They are not just using each other. They are not just there for pleasure, because remember, we see this is the pleasure mode with Julian, with women, right? We've seen, as it's mentioned, as it's alluded to there, has been these affairs that he's been having, right? That he's been, sleeping with all these different women, but he doesn't really have any, emotional attachment to them. He doesn't really have any real relationship with them in the way that he does, in the profound way he does with Julia. Okay. So, to finish off, let's think quickly about some of these other relations. How can we categorize them according to Aristotle's method? Olivier and Cardinal Ciccani, what kind of relationship do they have? Utility, right? Use value. We've seen very clearly, right? Ciccani and Olivier are not friends, right? They're not friends in the real sense. They are just useful to each other, and so patron and almost like a servant in Olivier's case. Okay. What about Olivier and Luca Pisano, the painter? What kind of relationship is theirs? It's a bit more tricky. We haven't seen much of Luca Pisano yet, have we? Right. But what have we seen? Has he been useful? Have either of them been useful? Yes. But now, because Olivier was useful to Luca because he was able to get Ciccani to sponsor his painting, right? To get him to paint the Chapel of St. Sophia. But now that use value is over now, isn't it? Right? So it can't just be use value, because they're still friends. They're still hanging out with each other. What could it be? It seems, at this stage, it seems to be more pleasure, right? That they're fun, finds them fun to be around, right? So we'll see this unfold as their story unfolds as well, right? As I said, the one story that we know the least about at the moment is Olivier's, right? And there's a lot more to find out about his history and his past. Okay? So Luca Pisano, Well, obviously it's not use value, because we see that even though Olivier was useful to him and that use has ended, they're still friends. But they do enjoy each other's company, therefore we think probably grounded in pleasure. They could be real friends, but we have to wait and see. Okay, what about the Cardinal Ciccani and the Comte de Frejus? That one's not hard, is it, right? They basically do a political business deal together, not very friendly, and it's just grounded in how useful the other can be. Okay. Manlius and Felix? Which one? Virtue? Aren't they useful to each other? Yes, they are. But is that the foundation of the friendship? No, it's not. Right? Okay. So we see this is why, like, at this stage, the friendship is like, if it was just use value, then, right, Felix would have rebelled against Manlius becoming the bishop. Right? But instead, he tries to make peace between them, and he trusts Manlius that he's doing the right thing. Okay? Okay. All right. What about Manlius and Caius Valerius, who is the guy who was, if Manlius had chosen not to become the bishop, would probably have been elected bishop in Manlius's place, right? And if you remember, in the very first few pages of the novel, we had the dinner party at Manlius's house, right? And Manlius, remember, he's looking forward to seeing his good friends, like his real friends, like Felix and Lecontius. But remember, he's like, oh, but then I also have to invite those other guys, right? Especially that Caius Valerius, right? What is their relationship? Well, they have to remain on friendly terms, don't they? Right? They need each other, so it's utility, isn't it? It's use value, right? So that's why Manlius invites him to the dinner party, even though they're not real friends. Caius Valerius is useful to him. He needs him. He needs his soldiers. He needs his money. He needs his political support, right? He needs those things from him, but they are not really friends. It's use value. Right? What about Manlius and Sophia? Right? Real friendship? Yep. Right? What tells us that it's not just use value? What happened in our reading previously that showed us that it's... Right? He offered her, well, before that, he offered her money, didn't he? Right? He's like, oh, I'll give you all sorts of money. I'll give you, I'll give you houses. I'll give whatever you want. I'll give to you. Right? And Sophia turns it down. Right? So we strongly suspect from that kind of action, oh, probably she's not just friends with Manlius for his money and his influence. All right? What tells us it's not about pleasure? They seem to get along. Do they? Do they have fun together, Manlius and Sophia? Well, she spends quite a bit of time scolding him, right? He makes lots of mistakes as a student. She's like, ah, you're an idiot. Now, let's go back over this, and I want you to think properly this time, right? And she treats him very much like a wayward student, right? So certainly he seems to gain pleasure from their discussions, right, and from her wisdom, but it's not the foundation, is it? Right? It's not the foundation of their friendship. So you're right, it is a real friendship. Okay? Okay, and then lastly, remember, Syagrius is the young man that, the poor young man that Manlius adopts as his substitute son, since his wife can't have any children. What is their relationship? Utility in this case, right? Although we will see as we go along that it's certainly in Manlius's mind it's one of utility. Maybe not so much in Syagrius, right? That he actually does kind of love Manlius as a father, right? So we'll see. Remember that this is Aristotle's thesis is that this real friendship, right, lasts because it's grounded in the character of the other person, and that the character of the other person doesn't change. But we're going to see that very much put to the test, right, in the course of this novel, right? So think about some of these friendships that we have called as being true, real, deep friendships, right? And think about that later on when we see what happens to some of these friendships when they are really put to the test, right? We'll see whether they really are true, genuine friendships, and whether character really is a guarantee of lasting, virtuous friendship. Okay, thank you guys. Remember, no class on Thursday, but please do keep up with the reading. And when we come back here on Monday, we will cover all of the pages from here to next week. So just one prep sheet for then, because we just need the prep sheets for discussion. Okay, thank you.